Joining me now are three major players in expanding digital connectivity. That's what we're going to be talking about today. You just met, of course, Lawson is Togo's Minister of Digital Economy and Transformation. Next to her is Mcebisi Jonas, who's Executive Director of the MTN Group, that's South African mobile telecommunications provider. And John Giusti to my left is Chief Regulatory Officer for GSMA. It represents the interests of mobile network operators worldwide. Please join me in welcoming them. So John, let's talk about how big the problem is when we're talking about the usage gap. Billions of people who aren't yet connected on mobile internet services despite having coverage available. How big a problem are we talking about? And what is standing in the way of those particular folks being connected?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I like to look at it as the opportunity, because we know that through investment, the coverage gap keeps getting smaller. And it is this usage gap, the number of people who could be accessing broadband services but aren't. And so if you look globally, that number is 34%. But if you look at Africa, the number is 58%. So that's a huge opportunity to bring a large part of the population into digital inclusion. But I think what we need to look at, and it's fantastic to have both industry and government here today, because nobody can do it alone. Mm-hmm. We have to think creatively how we can confront the barriers. And I think the two biggest barriers are affordability, and particularly device affordability, and also, of course, the digital skills. So how can we make sure that they have the skills and tools to use it? Make sure there's relevant content for them as well?
Minister Lawson, do you agree with that assessment that those are the two biggest barriers to better internet penetration? And we should also point out Togo has seen a massive increase in the amount of people who are getting connected to broadband services. So share your secrets. How did you do that?
So thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here today. There are few comments I want to make. The first, in terms of broadband, the challenge that we face today on the continent is really to have fixed broadband, and I'm talking about fiber. It's true that when we look at the internet and the history of internet on the continent, it was all about mobile, but we are a young continent and employment is a challenge. So, and no corporation will ever go to any place because there is good 4G or good satellite connectivity. They will go to some place because they know that there is reliable broadband. So that's a challenge, because when we talk about fixed infrastructure, we talk about spending an awful lot of money for unproven business case on a continent where people are poor. And so that requires from government to step up or step in, I don't know, and try to find solutions to support investment so that the prices of services be low. And that's a project that we've been doing in Togo with the World Bank. And the project aims to connect to fiber all schools and hospitals and provide them with services at very cheap prices. So that's one thing. The second, when we talk about usage gap, goes beyond broadband. It's about content. Why do you want to connect people? You want to connect people because you want them to have access to relevant content. And relevant content is also, as you know, a challenge on the continent. We need not only educational content, but we also need content that have been developed by us that reflect our cultures and our values, and we don't have that so far, you know? And thank you very much. And the third aspect is, of course, device affordability or accessibility. In Togo right now, 40% of phones are 2G only phones. And we ask telcos, and all our networks are 4G networks. But if people have 2G only phones, then they don't have access to the internet. And we need to solve this. And we've been looking into various solutions with other countries to try to bring the prices down.
Mr. Jonas, Minister Lawson mentioned the potential role for government in all of this. You're in the private sector now, but of course previously you did serve as the Deputy Finance Minister in South Africa. So tell us a little bit more about public-private partnerships. Should governments be doing more, both to invest in the physical infrastructure, but also make devices more affordable? Subsidies, for example. What's your take?
I guess I mean the I will add a third issue, which is content, local content. I mean, so it's affordability, digital literacy, as well as content generally, which is a problem generally. On affordability, it's very clear that, I mean, the whole look at digital equity and is important because it takes a shift from just looking at access to looking at how people are connected into the digital economy, how their lives are improved, social mobility, and all of those issues. And all those issues clearly are interest areas for governments, I mean, basically. I mean, if you think about it. It also has a huge potential for improving political transparency and economic transparency across markets and policy transparency across markets. So my view is that essentially the debate is about what forms of partnership can you develop between government, the private sector, and multilateral institutions. Because I think solving device cost and device prices, I don't think it's only a function of what telcos are doing. It is also a function of what government puts into there. The second part is obviously regulation. I mean, it's very clear that, I mean, the continent has moved very fast in terms of creating the regulatory environment, but we must admit, over the last couple of years, in terms of the investment climate in the continent, it has retrogressed in many serious ways. As a result, I think we need a new conversation about what is the right environment in the continent for continuing to encourage and increase the levels of investment in infrastructure, telco infrastructure in particular, but also in other areas as it were.
John, say more on that in terms of what is the right environment. Where have you seen examples of successful partnerships, healthy environments that foster this kind of investment and expansion of digital access? Where are the examples that can be iterated on in other places?
I mean, well, let me start by actually saying the context of where we are, because I think too often we think about the mobile industry 20 years ago. And actually now we're in an environment where we see 40% year-on-year traffic growth, which requires investment. We see return on capital employed below 10% globally. And we see all of us share a desire not to raise consumer prices. So if we want to be competitive and invest, we need to think about where can we remove the cost. So it can be, and this is where government and industry could partner together, because to make sure that their digital ambitions are matching with the policy landscape. I mean, it's hard. Obviously, governments need revenue, and these companies are in the market. So therefore, you know, and it is right that we pay our fair share of taxes. But I think one of the things we also need to be thinking about is what role does the broader digital economy, especially those companies coming in, riding over the networks, making money from the citizens, what investment should they be making into Africa? So let's think about the role they play. But I think we see some great examples across the country where we see leadership, like the minister here, thinking creatively about how to get more of the citizens connected and reaching out to the right players to make sure that it's done in partnership, whether it be with the World Bank, whether it be looking, we were speaking before about can you build scale by working with countries across the region so you're actually buying in bulk, or working with the operators across the region. So I think we can no longer look country to country. We need to think from the regional perspective, how can we drive Africa's ambitions in a way that will work for Africa and make sure that the infrastructure is in place so they are competitive with other parts of the world.
Minister Lawson, tell us more about what's worked in Togo.
Yeah.
When you see that growth of expansion, how did you get to it? And also, what's been the downstream impact of that, specifically around economic growth?
Yeah, so I would say that for our countries, we can't make it happen without working with international organizations such as the World Bank and so on, because we need patient money, we need to fund infrastructure for the future. And so the idea is, of course, to work with the existing private sector. We are not the ones deploying the networks, but we are the ones contributing to fund them with some money that is grant money rather than anything else. Because we need to, when it comes to Africa, often people tend to want to forget that market economies can function. And so a lot of times people will come to you and say, can you do it for free? No, I can't do it for free. What I can do, and I don't want to, by the way, what I can do is to make sure that the price is low so that it is sustainable. And so that's why to have patient money, to have money contributed by the World Bank, others, is very important. And so that's the type of models that, that can work on the continent, that are going to be working. And same for devices. What we are looking to do, working with UNICEF, is to come together with many other countries so that we can buy in bulk at lower prices terminals. And when we talk about devices, it's not only smartphones, but it's also tablets and computers, because you do know that even within universities today, not all students have computers. And so the model would be not only to come with other countries to buy in bulk, but we also need to find some kind of a financing mechanism. Is it come up with some guarantees so that we cover the risk for distributors in case of default? Or is it working again with international organizations to fund something? Because these are recurring costs. And why international organizations? It's because you do know that we have a lot of other projects to fund as a country. So it's important, especially when it comes to consumer goods and so on, to work with money that comes from outside of our countries rather than fund solely on using our budget money.
When it comes to the usage gap, Mr. Jonas, within that gap, we often see a gender gap as well, in terms of lack of access, lack of connectivity, lack of opportunity. Is that prevalent here as well when we talk about this usage gap? And what is the economic and social impact of that?
It is centrally a component of the conversation, broadly speaking. I must say that sometimes we use the term Africa and we think that is homogeneous. I think there's no one Africa. I think different countries have different problems, different challenges. There are commonalities, a lot of commonalities, but I think we must appreciate that there's a kind of differentiation of what you find in different countries. This actually, for me, raised another question about how do you ensure that there is at least uniformity or alignment of policy across different markets in the continent. But that's probably another area that we should actually be talking about. And as far as gender inequality, I think you've got interesting examples in different countries. I mean, how women, through digital connection and access to digital networks, they're able to better access health, they're able to better access economic opportunities, they are able to actually participate in financial inclusion, etc. They are also able to participate in politics, basically. So I think it is not just a debate that is narrowly about society as a whole. It also cuts across different sectors. The youth, women are probably central in that, how to find jobs, etc. Digital access becomes a critical component around that. I wanted to end by saying that if you think about it, when I came in, the last speaker was saying, our spend on one subscriber in the continent is about $5. I mean, the spend of one subscriber is $5, and in elsewhere it is $50. So that shows the difference. But the amount of money you put into infrastructure is the same. So that's why I think the debate about financing mechanism is crucial. You have another elephant in the room now, which is the geopolitical environment. Mm-hmm. It also influences the choice of technology very substantially. And I think it's a real material issue for different markets. I mean, the issue of how do you choose technology, how do you mix technology, as it were, given the current geopolitical and the weaponization of trade, which is the reality that we have at the moment. And the continent probably has to kind of navigate the path and in a very sensitive way in order to ensure that it will continue to drive development, as it were. But I think there has to be a broader understanding that developing economies are affected by the geopolitical dynamics in ways that I think at the moment have not been built into the models about digital equity, etc. And that's dangerous, I think, in the long term.
Mr. Lawson, can I get your take on this briefly? Because you raised the interesting point about the geopolitical moment, but also this idea that closing the usage gap means a greater connectivity for people to be involved politically, to express their own content, to be able to engage with elected officials. Is that something that you've seen in Togo as the usage gap closed?
So we're a small country, and we try to stay away from, geopolitical, I would say, to picking sides and so on. So the issue for us is to find devices that are cheap and corresponds to our needs, and we should stick to that. I think you're right that there is the geopolitical issue, but I also think that as a continent, with all the other issues we face, we should maybe look at what we need first and be only concerned about that. But so that's the first comment I'll make. The second comment I'll make is really follow the money, because we're talking about having these devices cheap. We're talking about finding, the funds to acquire them. So it depends on the type of models that we will see emerge that will solve our needs, I would say.
I thank you all so much for joining in this very important conversation. Please join me in thanking our panelists, Mr. Lawson, Mr. Jonas, and John Giusti. Thank you all.